Yeah, that's me. I look better in the photos like most people. So, as is mentioned, I'll be talking about creating frictionless work in content and SEO. But you're probably wondering, who am I and why am I talking about this? So, I worked as a content manager for about 1 year in OxyLabs. Now I'm a PR content manager, which isn't much different. I also have about 5 years of copywriting experience in general through my various projects, and I'm a PhD student in philosophy. Those who are data-driven. I've calculated how many articles I've written in this quarter, which is about 73. I lost count about that number. And about 14 landing pages and whatever I had to do for my PhD work in creative writing. So on to the agenda. I'll start with the problem, and then with the two vectors of solutions, which is perceptions and some practical advice for both content and SEO teams. So the problem, it's quite simple. It's that content and SEO teams sort of take hold of the same real estate, which is some kind of text, which is usually an article or landing page or whatever type of writing. And content people usually approach it from the side that they want something creative, something with a good idea, write something enticing or immersive or whatever word you want to pick. And SEO teams usually really grill people about structure, keywords, audiences, intent, and these sort of things cause a conflict. And no one seems to be talking about these problems. Luckily for you guys, I'm not no one. So here's the solution to the problem. I think that the primary problem is that different perceptions of what constitutes a good piece of writing cause the tension between teams. And one part of the issue, as I mentioned, is perception, and the other is practice. So on to the perceptions of the content teams. So I think when you get a newer writer, especially into some company, they start with the idea that they want to write something like novels or any type of writing they want. And it's usually pretty hard to convince them that there's some context, and that context is that they're writing for a company, which is a business. And what is the goal of business is, of course, money or capital accumulation or whatever fancy word you want to pick. Which means that good copywriting in business context is writing something that makes or saves money. Is also always related to money. And the role that SEOs play within content teams is that they provide the tools necessary for you to make money with your copywritten material, whatever it may be. Of course, content people are also interested in what's good writing in general, because they want to write good articles, whether they're creative works or copywritten material for business or whatever. So usually you get the answer that they have to get some fancy idea or some really good idea that will make them write the good article. And a lot of writers' block is exactly on this part. They don't have an idea on what to write or how to collect the entire thing. So the point is that ideas don't make writing good. Actually, most ideas are pretty bad ideas in my eyes. And sort of to prove this point, I've picked out 4 sort of creative works and sort of drill down to the basics of the idea. I think the 4th one will be clear to everyone. I think most people have seen what that thing might be. The other 3, I'll show it in the later slide, but does anyone know what number 3 is, for example? Does anyone remember that? Doesn't seem likely. Okay, the other 2 will be even more niche writings. Yes, it's schema. So the 3 works are Post Office, The Door in the Wall, and Schemos Balta Drobulė, or White Shroud, and SpongeBob SquarePants. My point is that all of these ideas really sound either boring or crazy or whatever, and they're not really something you would catch your attention to. But all of these, including SpongeBob, are very popular and well-known works. So the idea itself doesn't really matter. What matters is good editing, which is what makes writing great. And now on to perceptions for the SEO team, which is slightly different. My point to SEO is that, which is Clark's quote, that any sufficiently advanced technologies is distinguishable from magic. And what SEO people really do is sort of reverse engineer something so complex it's basically magic, which often looks a little like this. And what that means is that you're reverse engineering some extremely complex structure and you're sort of making predictions, which means that your work is not deterministic. It's basically probabilistic suggestions of what should be the best article they can write. What in practice it looks like. So when SEO teams give some recommendation, there's like 12 keywords of this and 5 keywords of this. But if you say that some keyword has to be mentioned 12 times, you can clearly state that if it's mentioned 2 times, it will be bad. If it's like 60 times, it will be bad. But if it's 13 or 11 times, it's really hard to start making the argument that it will be very bad if you miss one or overshoot one number, which means you shouldn't really punish content people so harshly if they miss a keyword or 2, which is quite a common problem. And moving on to the practical advice, which is for content teams, which is what should they focus on if money is the primary driver, which is one is sort of abstract, it's flow, it's immersiveness, in other words, which is if you've ever read a novel and noticed a grammatical error, you're sort of taken away from the entire thing and you forget what the novel was about and you can only focus on the grammatical error you see. So you should focus on making your articles sound as natural as they can. And the other part is editing, which is you have to accept that all people suck at writing, including me. Everyone that does that, but content writers usually get very attached to their first draft, and first drafts always are very bad, and you can't get away from it. You have to learn that editing is part of the journey. And to be less abstract about flow, I had an argument whether you should write demand and supply or supply and demand, and you can actually use Google's tool to look at how often a specific word is mentioned in books. And as we can see, supply and demand is a lot natural for most English speakers, and it's mentioned a lot more frequently. So that's part of the flow. If you start using unknown language or weird conjunctions, people get lost in your work. And another part of being a good content manager is making SEO people happy, which is a lot easier than most people think. What I do, I memorize the 3-5 primary keywords in each assignment, which is usually not a lot of words to remember. And I remember to fill them in when writing. Then when I finish the article, I go backwards from the conclusion and start filling in all the weird and wonky keywords that I might have missed. And that usually ends up in a pretty accurate to the recommendations article. Another suggestion is to learn to write the same idea or the same sentence in numerous ways, which I challenge myself to do also, because you'll often get lots of weird keywords that's hard to fit in, but if you learn to write the same idea in 5 different ways, you'll usually find somehow to fit it in, even if it's not very grammatically correct. And another important thing is start by thinking not what the intended audience is, but what they do already know. And someone has given me a good example about a person who was writing about a WordPress plugins article, and they started by writing five paragraphs about what is WordPress. So if a person is searching for a specific plugin, they already know what WordPress is, and you'll lose them in the first 2 paragraphs. They'll just click out. And moving on to the practical advice for SEO, it's more theoretical because a large part is helping content understand SEO better, and I think some damage was done like 5 years ago when you would go into LinkedIn and there were people like level 900 SEO wizard, and they would write in their titles, making the field seem as if it's some not data-driven or anything. I think SEO teams should put more effort into guiding the structured intended reader and focus less on style. Usually other content managers can proofread the article and give recommendations on better style but what I find copywriters struggle most is structure. From the perception part, you should have an acceptable range of missed keywords. If a content manager misses 1-2 keywords, usually it won't be the end of the world. And as a corollary to that, you should focus on total quality, not details, because I've found that a lot of SEO people like to optimize minor details, which give like 1 extra %. But by the time the article is out and it starts ranking, 6 months have passed and your optimizations for the 1% have already changed and no longer matters. So you're better out pushing 90% good articles faster rather than optimizing the last 10%. And you should democratize article generation. Usually content people have ideas on what they want to write about also, which I don't see why SEO people sort of deny content people doing that, because it saves you work and you have to do less. So just let content people bring ideas. And finally, not all content has to be SEO based. there's this tendency that the blog is only for SEO, but content people can write for marketing, for sales, and for account management teams. A lot of articles just slap the no index tag on the article, and everything will be fine. So that's it.
I want to see some hands. No? That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so I'm going to start. So you talked about content people. That sounds like species, right? Yeah. Content people. So how do you measure the progress of this creative work?
There's two ways. You can usually, one is to ask other people, but I'm not that naive that people read my articles so intently that they could like tell me how much I am improved. Personally, what I do is when you think about writing an article, you usually have this great idea in your head and how it will sound and all these fancy words and all that. And you know you're progressing if your actual writing starts to match the idea you have in your head about the article. Because when you start writing, you have this fancy idea how well it will sound, and in the end it sounds like shit. And then you go through many editing stages to get it to sound where you want.
Okay, thank you. Still no questions on the audience? Oh, there is one. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation, and I wanted to ask a philosophical question since you're studying philosophy. Do you actually write for the search engines or for the people? Where is the line?
I actually write for the people, but I have my concessions, which is usually putting in keywords. But for example, when I do freelance or whatever work, I usually don't follow many of the suggestions, which is like word counts. I write as much as needed to explain the entire idea and make sure it sounds, the structure is really strong. The person, when he comes in, he knows how the article starts and where will it end. So the only concessions and also for the search engines that I do is sometimes putting in keywords and writing sentences in a way that don't sound really great, but they have that keyword that this SEO person wanted. But that's the only thing I sort of put for search engines only.
Thanks. That was a really nice question. So I guess this would be in the same spectrum of questions. So how to introduce content to SEO? Content teams to SEO. Yes.
Yeah. As I mentioned, you should really start with having a good foundation and being prepared when content people start asking a lot of questions like why this many keywords? Why this keyword? Why not? It's usually not because people are lazy and they don't want to put in the keywords or whatever. It's because they're usually generally fairly interested, and if you have good enough answers why specific parts of the recommendations are there, they can start understanding that it's also not some wizardry or black magic or whatever SEO people think SEO is.
All right, thanks. You also, okay, first you.
Hey. So I wanted to ask, what do you think are the main things that content people need to know about SEO?
That's a difficult question. I think they should understand that articles are written in a particular way, but it's only because search engines prefer us that they were written in a certain way, and that you don't have the luxury to go, like in a novel you can start writing about some other character's life and whatever. You don't have that luxury here. You have a very specific article and you should explain the topic in a very narrow way, and you can't make any digressions to the, because a lot of starting content people, as I've noticed, they add superfluous text. It's not a college essay where you have to like put in 2,000 words and you start writing random sentences to fill in the 2,000 words. You have to be very exact and very concrete, and very little has to be left to vagueness. And if something you feel it would be better explained in another topic or another article, just put that somewhere and think of a new article idea, and just don't write that paragraph if it doesn't belong there.
How do you motivate yourself to write content on the topics which you don't like, right? So every time you need to write, you want to kill yourself.
Well, I don't have that problem in particular because I find most topics interesting. I've written about beauty products, which I generally have no interest in, but I try to look for angles that would be interesting. For example, when I as the beauty products example, I try to look at how big the industry is. I like the data surrounding them. So I pick out something I know I like. For example, I like data. So I pick out these things and I add them into the article. So I have at least some fun of writing it.
Thank you. Yes?
What type of content do you like writing the most, and why? Like for ad copy, articles, landing pages?
I'm more of an article, a blog post writer. I would probably put blog posts first, landing pages second, and ad copies and whatever else third. I like blog posts because the moment I get a topic, I already know like 3 paragraphs I'll be writing, and I'm always ahead of time in my head, so it doesn't take a lot of time for me to write a blog post if I know the topic.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Oh, okay. So I have a last question for you. So you said that editing is way more important than idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when editing, how do you provide a constructive feedback?
When I do proofreading, and some people have experienced my proofreading here, it usually ends up in like 80 comments, but I always, even if it's like changing one word or changing something small, if it's not some like double spacing or whatever, I start by writing in my reasoning why I think this will sound better or why I think it will be. I think that's what constructive feedback is, because the person can also reject your feedback. But if you start just crossing out words or just asking questions that don't provide anything, there's nothing to learn from it. So I always provide fairly extensive reasoning within my proofreading.
Great, thank you.
Next question. I mean, do you feel yourself like a boomer sometimes when you're writing, like a millennial or young people? Do you step into another shoes?
Actually, I try to step into. When I start working with new projects, my first usually question is, how old is your audience? And what kind? Because you'll be writing very differently to people B2B, like 45-year-old men, and if you'll be writing to 18, 20-year-olds. So yeah, I usually try to manage my tone and think of how those people would think when writing.
Thank you.